This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. For the last few months or so, midterm polling has been pretty stable. The Democrats have regained a slight 1 to 2 point lead in the generic congressional ballot, which means they were likely to hold on to the Senate but unlikely to keep the House. However, in the past couple of weeks, Republicans have seen a surge in polling, and 538's poll aggregator now has the Democrats behind on the generic ballot, which means there's a good chance they lose the Senate as well. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the Republicans' poll surge, what's driving it, and how the Democrats might be able to win voters back in the 2 weeks before November the 8th. So let's start by looking at the numbers. For the last couple of months, Democrats have had a slight lead over Republicans in the generic ballot, a poll which asks respondents not which presidential or congressional candidate they plan to vote for, but rather which political party they prefer. The lead opened up in August when gas prices started falling and Biden made legislative progress on both the Inflation Reduction Act and, in late August, on the student loan forgiveness. However, the lead began narrowing in early October, and as of October the 23rd, Republicans now hold a 0.5 point lead over Democrats. It looks like the Republican poll surge here is mostly being driven by a poll swing from Democrat to Republican amongst independents, and especially women. According to polling by the New York Times, in September, Democrats had an 11-point lead with women and a 14-point lead with independent women. Their most recent polling from October, however, finds that Republicans and Democrats are now neck and neck when it comes to women, and Republicans have an 18-point lead amongst independent women. Yep, you heard that right. In just a month, there's been a 32-point swing amongst independent women, with Democrats going from a 14-point lead to an 18-point deficit. Obviously, this is just one poll, and it had a sample size of just 792 people, only a small fraction of whom would have been identified as independent women. But even if the real swing is significantly smaller than this poll implies, it's probably still true that women look less favourably upon Democrats than they did a month ago. Anyway, this Republican poll surge means that Democrats are now very unlikely to keep the House, and at serious risk of losing the Senate. According to 538, Democrats now have just a 55% chance of keeping the Senate, down from 70% a month ago, and the most likely outcome is a 50-50 seat split. So why is this? Why are Republicans surging in the polls? Well, it's in some part down to Republicans' media strategy. After months of being outspent by Democrats, in the last month or so, Republicans have spent nearly as much as Democrats on TV and media advertising. In large part thanks to a spending splurge by the Senate Leadership Fund, a super PAC affiliated with Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. However, it's also probably something to do with voters changing political priorities. In the past month or so, voters' attention has become squarely focused on the economy, which is now the only real issue on voters' minds. This hasn't always been the case this midterm season. Uvalde temporarily made gun control a voter priority in May and June, and the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade temporarily made abortion legislation a voter priority back in July. However, the salience of these issues has died down over time, and voters are now more focused on the economy than they were before. This is good news for Republicans, who generally poll better than Democrats when it comes to the economy. A recent NBC poll found that Republicans have a 19-point lead over Democrats on the issue. So it makes sense that, as voters focus more squarely on the economy, Republicans' poll numbers go up. More specifically though, voters really care about inflation at the moment. Monmouth University polling found that the numbers of voters citing inflation as an extremely important issue jumped 9 points in October, going from 37% to 46%. While year-on-year inflation has cooled, it's obviously still a lot higher than Americans would like. The latest data from September put inflation at 8.2%, down about 1% from its June peak of 9.1%, but still way above the Fed's 2% target. It's also worth saying that inflation is being driven by price increases in what we might call politically significant goods, i.e. things that voters really notice. For example, year-on-year inflation for food at home is at 13%. Similarly, while gas prices fell in July, August and September, they saw a brief spike in late September and early October, largely driven by shutdowns of several refineries in the US for maintenance and a fire at one refinery in Ohio. These technical issues have since been resolved and gas prices have duly come down. But given that there's a ridiculously strong correlation between national gas prices and Democrat support, it's plausible that the spike might have helped the recent Republican poll surge. By the way, while we're here, it's worth saying that gas prices are a ridiculously reliable voting indicator. Data analysis by the Washington Post found that the correlation coefficient between gas prices and Democratic generic ballot polling is minus 0.91. While the correlation between gas prices and Biden's approval 3 weeks later is minus 0.8. For those of you who aren't maths geeks, that basically means that when gas prices go up, Democrats' poll numbers almost always go down, and vice versa. This is sort of ridiculous, given that, well, the US government has very little control over global oil prices, as the recent debacle with Saudi Arabia demonstrated. But hey-ho. Voters' newfound focus on the economy might also explain why Democrats have fared so poorly with women recently. Studies suggest that inflation hits women harder than it hits men. This is partly because women are poorer than men on average, and the recent bout of inflation has disproportionately affected poor people, who spend a larger percentage of their income on food and gas. However, it's also because, for some reason, when inflation goes up, the price of products aimed at women rises faster than that of products aimed at men. This is true across the world. New Statesman analysis of ONS data in the UK found that women's items reliably saw sharper price increases than men's items. According to a study published last year in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, women are also more likely to notice inflation because they do most of the grocery shopping, which is where inflation is particularly apparent. Now, obviously, this is just a theory, but it does fit the data, at least superficially. Anyway, you get the idea. The Republican poll surge is mainly down to the fact that voters are more focused on the economy than they were before. Inflation is high, and Republicans usually do better on the economy anyway, so they're seeking a spike in popularity. So, on to the final bit of this video. What can Biden do about it? Well, he can't do much about inflation, that's for sure. As we alluded to earlier, inflation is mostly driven by global factors outside of Biden's control. With just 2 weeks to go, he's basically just going to have to hope that voters notice that gas prices are already falling and that OPEC don't decide to engage in further cuts at their next meeting. Biden might also be able to keep gas prices down a bit by releasing barrels from America's strategic reserves, or perhaps draw voters' attention away from inflation by talking about, say, jobs, or pushing through new attention-grabbing policies like marijuana decriminalization. Ultimately, though, Biden probably needs some good luck if he wants to regain the momentum going into the midterms. Anyway, if that puts you in a bad mood, then this might cheer you up.
Last year, Team TLDR congregated for the first annual political pumpkin carving competition.
Each team member had 15 minutes to carve a random politician's face into a pumpkin before the others had to guess who they'd carved.
Everyone was furious at last year's result, so we brought the game back from the dead for round 2.
This time though, we headed to Rory's farm in Essex to up the game.
This time it was also a lot more serious and a lot more competitive.
Who did we carve?
Who won the contest?
Find out in TLDR's second annual political pumpkin carving contest, exclusively on Nebula.
If you want to watch that video, along with a ton of other exclusive content, then head over to Nebula. That's the streaming service we made with a bunch of our creator friends, where we post exclusive explainers and fun videos, like our team attempting the British citizenship test, or our blooper reel.
On Wednesday, Peru's Prime Minister... Oh, God. I'm just going to ask next door, I'll be back. Turns out there's a bunch of useless next door.
Nebula viewers also get many of our videos before YouTube, as well as our content ad-free. If you do want to sign up, the best deal is with the Nebula Curiosity Stream deal. That way, if you sign up to Curiosity Stream, home to some of the best documentaries online, you'll also get Nebula absolutely free. That means 2 streaming services for less than $15 a year. Anyway, thanks for supporting the channel.